Number 10. Triangle object. The Defense Department has confirmed that leaked photos and videos of an unidentified aerial phenomenon taken in 2019 are indeed legitimate images of unexplained objects. Photos and videos of triangle-shaped objects blinking and moving through the clouds were taken by Navy personnel, Pentagon spokeswoman Sue Go said in a statement to CNN. She also confirmed that photos of 3 unidentified flying objects, one spear-shaped, another acorn-shaped, and one characterized as a metallic blimp, were also taken by Navy personnel. As we have said before, to maintain operation security and to avoid disclosing information that may be useful to potential adversaries, DoD does not discuss publicly the details of either the observations or the examinations of reported incursions into our training ranges or designated airspace, including those incursions initially designed as UAP, she said. She also said that the Identified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, created to investigate UFO sightings observed by the military, has included these incidents in their ongoing examinations. Number 9. Drone footage. On April 19, 2023, the Pentagon released another video featuring MQ-9 drone footage from the Middle East depicting a UAP. In the footage dated July 12, 2022, which the US Defense Department shared online, the US military's MQ-9 Reaper drone, somewhere in the Middle East, exactly where wasn't disclosed, can be seen monitoring a strange metallic silver orb-like object flying around below it at some seemingly high speeds while the drone's camera tries to follow it. This footage is significant because while there have been previously declassified US military footage of UFOs, those were all taken by pilots in manned aircrafts. This one, however, was taken by a drone. However, this isn't the only time this particular UFO has been seen. Apparently, there has been many other sightings of a strange metallic orb in the Middle East. Sean M. Kirkpatrick, director of the Pentagon's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, told a Senate Armed Services subcommittee that it resembled a small metallic orb. He added there isn't an explanation for, but the reason for is due to lack of available data. It is going to be virtually impossible to fully identify that just based on that video, he said, according to ABC News. Number 8. ADAR. The Pentagon's new Office for Investigating Potential UFO Sightings received hundreds of news reports in 2022, and while it can explain more than half of these events, a sizable chunk remains a mystery. Within the new batch of sightings, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office and the Office of Director of National Intelligence say they're focusing on some 171 cases, including some in which objects appear to have demonstrated unusual flight characteristics or performance capabilities and require further analysis. Since it was formed last summer, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office has received 366 reports of UAP. That total reflects 247 new UAP reports and another 119 that occurred before March 2021 but hadn't been included in the earlier report. The new numbers indicate a steep rise in UAP sightings. Now, the report released in June 2021 lists just 144 reports covering a 17-year period. With the subsequent additions, 510 UAP reports were in their files at the end of August 2022. Officials say they believe the rise in UAP reports is due to the US government's effort to destigmatize the topic of UAP and instead recognize the potential risks the phenomenon poses, both with aviation hazard and potential advisable activity, such as foreign surveillance efforts. Number 7. Dancing lights. On January 29, 2023, Canadian air traffic controllers and pilots couldn't identify 2 white lights moving in a circular pattern reported over Canada's Northwest Territories. Good evening, just wondering, do you got 2 planes that are just to the east of your field doing circuits or maneuvers? A crew member aboard a Canadian North flight headed to Yellowknife asked air traffic controllers. Negative, I have no reported traffic in the area. The Yellowknife air traffic controller replied, do you have a visual on something? The crew responded somewhat hesitantly, yeah, we're looking at 2 lights dancing around here to the east of your field. They're above us about I don't know what. We're not seeing them on the TCAS, Traffic Collision Avoidance System, but we can see lights moving around. Then there's a pause before the crew member on the radio back say, we're not crazy. No, we believe you, the air traffic controller replies, and the sighting remains unexplained. Number 6. Over New Mexico. On February 21, 2021, a pilot flying over New Mexico at the altitude of 37 7,000 feet, reported seeing a long cylindrical object that almost looked like a cruise missile type thing moving really fast over the top of them, according to published audio. American Airlines confirmed that the radio transmission came from Flight 2292. The FAA a few days later stated, a pilot reported seeing an object over New Mexico shortly after noon local time on Sunday, February 21st, 2021. FAA air traffic controllers did not see any objects in the area of their radar scopes. Seems like air traffic can never see these objects, but the pilots can, and I can't tell if that's better or worse. Number 5. The coin incident. At 7:30 p.m. on October 18th, 1973, American Airlines Flight 21 encountered a UFO near Mansfield, Ohio, and reported it. This would be the first of dozens of sightings reported in that area that night. However, the most astonishing one took place 3 hours later and became known as the coin incident. Sometime after 10:30 p.m., an Army Reserve helicopter piloted by Captain Lawrence Coyne and a crew of 3 men was flying from Columbus to Cleveland when somewhere around Mansfield they noticed a red light on the horizon. They then realized that the object was heading straight for them at a high rate of speed. Coyne quickly descended to avoid collision, but as the men were preparing for impact, the object came to a halt in front of them and projected a green pyramid-shaped beam over the helicopter. At the same time this was happening, the men reported the helicopter being pulled up towards the UFO. However, it then let go and darted out of sight. The incident lasted 5 minutes. The men described a gray metallic-looking dome-shaped object with a red light on one end and white light on the other. Now, interestingly, after the incident, according to one crew member, the helicopter never worked right again. Now, this whole incident was seen from the ground by a mother and her 2 children who pulled their car over to watch what was going on. They reported seeing the helicopter chasing an object they said looked like a blimp, pear-shaped and as big as a school bus. Number 4. Trumbull County UFO Incident. Featured on the History Channel and numerous UFO documentaries, the Trumbull County UFO incident in northeast Ohio is exceptional because it was witnessed by numerous police officers and a 911 dispatcher, all of whom were being recorded as they spoke back and forth about the strange events unfolding on the evening of December 14th, 1994. It was also seen by many members of the public as well. Now, around midnight, Trumbull County 911 began receiving calls from residents about a strange low-flying light in the sky. The dispatcher sent out Liberty Township police officers to investigate, and one of them was Sergeant Toby Maloro, who saw a light. He got out of his car and looked up to see what he described as a giant circular-shaped object and intensely bright in the center section. It made no sound at all, and the object was there for about 30 seconds before moving away. Shaken, the sergeant decided to chase the object, as did many other police officers in the area. In total, at least 14 law enforcement officers saw the object at night, with all of them discussing it openly on their radios. Number 3. Navy pilots. Recently, 2 former Navy pilots were interviewed by 60 Minutes on CBS News about a UFO sighting over the Pacific Ocean in 2004. Commander Dave Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich spotted the unidentified object during a training exercise but were unable to classify it. Dave described it as a little white tic-tac looking object, adding that it lacked conventional exhaust plumes and had no wings or visible markings. It also moved erratically, the pilot said. In an interview with NBC News, Dave described the 2004 encounter, calling the object the strangest, most obscure thing I've ever seen flying. As soon as we look down, we see the white water, and then we see this white tic-tac. It's pointing north-south, and it's just going forward, back, left, right, he said, adding that it was bouncing around like a ping pong ball. Dave said he approached the mysterious object to take a closer look, and it began mirroring his movements. Then when the pilot got within half a mile of the UFO, it suddenly vanished. My question is, what was he going to do if he got closer? This whole story is just crazy. Number 2. Multiple objects in the sky. Ryan Graves, a former Navy pilot who testified that he witnessed UAP with his own eyes, has called on President Joe Biden to investigate the mysterious object spotted in American airspace. Ryan, a former fighter pilot, explained that after 2014, when upgrades were made to our radar system, our squadron made a startling discovery. There were unknown objects in our airspace, and these were not mere balloons like the Chinese spy balloon that dominated the country's attention in February. These are no mere balloons, they could hold their position, appearing motionless, despite Category 4 hurricane force winds of 120 knots. They did not have any visible means of lift or control surfaces, in other words, nothing that resembled normal aircraft with wings, flaps, or engines. These are not isolated incidents, Ryan said. We have a real UFO problem, and it's not balloons. The point is that we don't have a clear understanding of what's above our heads as we thought we did. There are uncertainties up there that we have to deal with. If we don't do it, our adversaries are going to take advantage of that uncertainty, that weakness, to spy on us with various means, as we've seen. It's pretty clear. If there are things over our head and we're not sure what they are, well, we need to figure it out. If they're adversarial, it's a national security issue. We have mechanisms for that. If it's not a national security issue, then it's not an adversarial platform, then it's a matter for scientific inquiry. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this scares me a little bit. And coming in at number 1 is leaked video. A leaked Navy video captured in July 2019 showed a sphere-shaped unidentified object flying over water near San Diego. The footage obtained by a documentary filmmaker and shared with NBC News appeared to show a mysterious object flying for a few minutes before disappearing into the water. The video was captured by a Navy aircraft and recorded in the USS Amsa Combat Information Center, according to the filmmaker Jeremy Corbell. The clip appears to show a spherical object flying above the water for a few minutes near San Diego before it vanishes. It splashed, military personnel can be heard saying in the video. The Defense Department confirmed that the clip was recorded by Navy personnel and said it will be reviewed by the Pentagon's Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force, a panel established last year to gain insight into the nature and origins of such objects.
And we're going to start things off with the latest buzz in extraterrestrial news: the mysterious bodies of supposed mummified aliens that were displayed in front of the Mexican Congress. Jamie Maussan, a journalist and UFOologist, presented these fossilized bodies to the politicians, claiming that they're over 1,000 years old. He testified under oath saying, quote, "These specimens are not part of the evolution of our world. They were not recovered from a UFO scrap. They were found fossilized in a diatom moss mine." So this is the first public congressional hearing on UFOs in Mexico, which is pretty cool, but I gotta say, these alien bodies look a little suspect. They're kind of cute. If this is what our standard grays really look like, that would be a pleasant surprise. They've always been reported as being short and scrawny, but these things look like they're almost doll-sized. Anyway, I hope this is legit, but what do you think? Let us know in the comments. Next up, we have a UFO hovering over Mexico City. This video is taken in 2015 and shows what appears to be some kind of mysterious object hovering in the air. Pretty good video because we get a good long look at the object, and it definitely looks odd. Strange shape to it. It's been described as beetle-like, which I can definitely see. The video was sent to Scott Waring, a self-proclaimed UFO expert. He's come up a couple times in my previous videos. Anyway, he thought the clip was legit enough to share on his YouTube channel. This could be a drone, but again, what do you all think? Next on the list, we have the 1991 Eclipse UFO sighting. This was a pretty big case at the time, probably one of the most famous UFO sightings in Mexico. During the 1991 solar eclipse, there was a big celebration in Mexico City, and many took to videotaping the sky to document being thrust into sudden darkness in the middle of the day. But on some of these tapes, folks managed to capture something they weren't expecting to see: a mysterious silver disc-shaped object hovering through the sky. A television executive named Guillermo Aragon took the most well-known piece of footage and sent the tape to, again, Jamie Maussan, the same guy we brought up before with those alien bodies. This guy's been in the UFO scene for a very long time. Anyway, the footage was released to the public, and the TV station was flooded with phone calls with people claiming to have seen the object, and more tapes started getting sent in, some of which showed that same strange disc-like object. At number 7, we have the Mexican Air Force sighting. On March 5th, 2004, several Mexican Air Force pilots filmed a series of strange, glowing, unidentified flying objects, 11 in total, hovering in the skies over southern Campeche state. The pilots were on routine anti-drone trafficking vigilance when they spotted the strange objects which they reported surrounding their jet. They attempted to pursue the objects, but eventually they disappeared out of sight. Gotta say, this is a pretty compelling piece of footage. Even though the video quality isn't great, you get to observe these objects for a long time. It's not like they just appeared and flew away in the blink of an eye. Plus, I always find it interesting when pilots who spend a great deal of time flying in the air observe things like this and have no explanation for what it is. Number 6, Carlos de los Santos sighting. Carlos de los Santos is a retired pilot who experienced a terrifying encounter with 3 disc-shaped UFOs in 1975. He was on a flight back to Mexico City in his Piper 24 Comanche. There was nothing wrong with the plane, weather conditions were good, and he was about an hour into the flight when suddenly he spotted something on his right wing. It was a silver disc-like object, about 13 feet long. He was incredibly startled and confused by this, and to make matters worse, it wasn't long until he spotted an identical object on his left wing. And then a third object appeared, this time hurling towards him from the front of the plane, and it just missed him. And it was at this point that Carlos lost control of the plane altogether. He tried to move the control wheel, but the plane wouldn't respond. He made a frantic call to air traffic control saying he had lost control of his aircraft and that he was surrounded by UFOs before suddenly his plane completely changed course. The plane started to ascend, climbing higher and higher into the sky. He basically thought he was going to die. Just when he'd started to accept his fate and that there was no way he was going to get out of this situation, the strange objects flew away from his aircraft and he found that the controls were suddenly working again. At number 5, we have the Popocatépetl volcano. I could fill up an entire list with the UFO sightings spotted in this one area alone. It's not only one of the most active volcanoes in the country, but it seems to be one of the biggest hotbeds of unidentified flying objects as well. UFO sightings around the volcano have raised eyebrows and sparked curiosity among locals and researchers. Witnesses describe seeing strange, unidentified flying objects near the volcano, often displaying unconventional flight patterns and characteristics. The sightings have been documented by multiple sources too, including photographs, videos. One of the factors contributing to the frequent UFO sightings near the volcano is its geographic location. The volcano stands at an elevation of over 17,000 feet and is situated in a region known for seismic and volcanic activity. Some speculate that these conditions might attract extraterrestrial, intersect, or create unusual atmospheric phenomena that lead to the sightings. Reports of UFOs around the volcano have also drawn the attention of researchers and organizations dedicated to studying unidentified aerial phenomenon. These groups aim to collect data and analyze eyewitness accounts and investigate the nature of these sightings. Now, I think some of these sightings can obviously be attributed to natural phenomenon or aircraft, but there are others that remain unexplained. Next on the list is the luminous UFO. Just at the end of July this year, in a town called Tamaulipas in northeastern Mexico, this strange glowing object was seen hovering in the sky. It's hard to really call it an object though. Kind of just looks like light. Maybe there's an object projecting the light, but it's just obscured by clouds or haze, and this is just the lights from the aircraft piercing through. Anyway, the clip was shared to TikTok by user Marcela Guzman, and it's kind of beautiful actually, almost like a jellyfish floating through the sky. Number 3, the Las Lomas UFO. This next piece of footage was taken in 1997. As you could probably tell by the tasty VHS grainy quality, it was taken in the Las Lomas neighborhood in Mexico City. Pretty obvious what's going on in this video. You see what looks like your classic B-movie disc-shaped UFO floating through the sky as our cameraman films on with audible shock and confusion. The object seems to be quite wobbly too, which leads a lot of commenters to say it looks like it's being held up with a string. There are other less skeptical viewers though who speculate that maybe there was something wrong with the vessel, which would help explain why it was flying so low in the first place as well. It's actually a pretty fascinating video because while the wobbliness of this supposed alien vessel does make it look less convincing, it does appear to be floating in the distance. It doesn't look like some kind of camera trick. And in terms of faking something like this with computer generated effects, that was much more difficult to pull off in 1997, especially for your average everyday person. Next, we have a story from Reddit that I'm going to call Consumed by Light. It was posted by Space Chainsaw 810 and goes like this. Not my story, but my wife's middle school teacher in Mexico. The teacher was with a group of her 3 friends driving from, I believe, Tijuana to Mexicali. To get there, they passed through a very curvy downhill grade called La Rumorosa, and the surrounding terrain is rocky cliffs and desert as they descend. You start to descend and see a very bright light coming towards them. They think it's a semi-truck with their high beams on, but the light gets brighter and brighter until it consumes them. They all wake up hours later at the bottom of the grade, on the side of the road, unharmed, but they all had a strange needle mark on their upper forearms. Finally, we have Mayan artifacts. There's this theory that's floated around for years that the Mayans were visited by extraterrestrials thousands of years ago, possibly aiding them in constructing the brilliant architecture that they had. Many Mayan artifacts came to public attention in 2012 following the Mexican government's disclosure that they had been kept hidden for approximately 80 years. Some of these artifacts feature carvings and drawings that bear pretty striking resemblance to flying saucers and small beings with large eyes. Speculations about whether the Mayans had actual contact with aliens became a pretty talked about thing at the time, and certainly the Mayans were known for their remarkable artistry, but some of these pieces were just a little too strange. For instance, one artifact is a sarcophagus lid portraying an individual seemingly enclosed within a capsule resembling a spaceship. Another piece is the palanque slab, depicting a figure seated in what closely resembles a cockpit adorned with numerous knobs and buttons. So, did the Mayans encounter something of extraterrestrial origin, and these artifacts were their means of documenting those encounters? There are quite a few similarities between the designs found on some of these ancient artifacts and the depictions of modern UFO sightings and spacecraft designs.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Project Grudge Report 13. Okay, I've read quite a few different UFO sighting stories and stories of alleged alien abductions, and this is fully one of the most terrifying I've ever heard of. So basically, the story starts off in March of 1956 when Jonathan P. Lovett was assisting Major William Cunningham in the White Sands Missile Testing Grounds near Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. The pair were out searching for debris from a recent rocket test when Major Cunningham heard a loud scream. His first thought was that Sergeant Lovett had been bitten by a snake, so he went around to help aid his partner, and this is when he allegedly saw something that he never expected. He recounted seeing the sergeant being dragged away by some sort of long serpentine arm that had wrapped around his legs. Whatever this creature was, it was connected to a hovering disc that was in the air about 15 feet away. The major stood there in horror as he watched this creature and the sergeant retreat into the craft, which then rose vertically into the sky. Of course, he radioed for help, and while he was taken to the hospital for observation after this, search teams were sent out immediately. It wouldn't happen until 3 days later that they would find the body of Sergeant Lovett only 10 miles away from the site where he was said to have disappeared from. The autopsy performed on him later also only raised more questions than answers, as his body was severely harmed. So of course there was an investigation that happened, and many people claim that this investigation was detailed in a 600-page document labeled Project Grudge Report 13. But the problem with this is that no official information on Report 13 exists, and the US government denies its very existence at all. Though Grudge Reports 1 through 12 have been declassified along with Report 14, no official mention or accounting of Report 13 exists, and the story solely relies on secondhand accounts of this horrible incident. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Air Force disappearance. On the night of November 23, 1953, near the Canadian-US border, the United States Air Defense Command noticed a blip on their radar where there shouldn't have been one. This was showing that there was some sort of unidentified object that was in restricted airspace over Lake Superior. In response to this, an F-89C Scorpion jet was sent to investigate with 2 crew members. First Lieutenant Felix Moncla was piloting the craft, while Second Lieutenant Robert Wilson was observing the radar. Once in the air, the pair had trouble tracking the object, which kept changing its course, which then led to ground control helping to direct them. The jet pursued the unknown object for 30 minutes as it closed in on it at 500 miles per hour. After a while, the 2 blips
on the radar, one being the unknown object and the other being the investigating jet, converged into one point, and then suddenly the radar return from the F-89 simply disappeared from ground control's radar scope. Shortly after this, the radar blip that was from the unidentified object also veered off and then vanished. The men who were sent to investigate in the jet never returned from the mission, and there was never any wreckage found signifying an accident despite extensive searches. The men and the jet just disappeared completely. It is said that the explanations for the disappearance that have been released throughout the years have changed and flip-flopped in what they say happened, so at this point, no one has any idea what really went on here. In our number 8 spot today, we have Dr. Brian O'Leary. Dr. Brian O'Leary is a former NASA astronaut and Princeton physics professor, and he has been quoted as saying that there is abundant evidence that we are being contacted, that civilizations have been monitoring us for a very long time, and that their appearance is bizarre from any type of traditional materialistic Western point of view. Apparently, he also said that these visitors use the technologies of consciousness, they use droids, they use co-rotating magnetic disks for their propulsion systems, which seems to be the common denominator of the UFO phenomenon. I obviously have no idea how I could possibly substantiate these claims, but they certainly are interesting, regardless of what you personally believe. And based on his education and work experience, it really is quite compelling. This could, of course, just be nonsense in order to stir up the masses, but it could also be someone who's finally telling us all the truth, but we're just too skeptical to believe it. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Roswell incident. This whole rigmarole started in 1947 when some sort of crash took place near a ranch in Roswell, New Mexico. Shortly after this, the Roswell Army Airfield released a statement saying that they had recovered a flying disc from the ranch, but the Army quickly retracted the statement and said that it wasn't that, but instead it was just a conventional weather balloon. This was a little sketchy, but most people let it slide until the 1970s. What happened in the 70s is that a retired lieutenant colonel began to speak out. In an interview with a UFO researcher, he said that the weather balloon story was a cover-up and that alien remains were actually recovered from the crash site. There were both first and second-hand witnesses who claimed that not only were there at least one, but possibly more alien spacecrafts that had crashed at the scene, that there were also extraterrestrial remains that were recovered by the military, who then began to engage in a cover-up. In 1994, the story changed from a weather balloon to a nuclear test surveillance balloon from Project Mogul, and it was stated that the stories of the alien bodies were probably just test dummies that had been dropped from high altitudes. I'm not gonna lie, the whole thing sounds a little sketchy. I obviously wasn't there, so I can't say for certain what happened, but someone is definitely lying. I'm just not sure who. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Stephenville UFO. In January of 2008, in the small town of Stephenville, Texas, a bunch of residents all saw something in the sky that they couldn't believe. In the beginning, it appeared to be white lights in the sky that were first in a single arc, but then they quickly moved to form 2 parallel lines. It was estimated that the lights were spanning about a mile long and half of a mile wide, but the craziest part is that it was flying at 3,000 miles per hour, which is similar to the speed of a fighter jet, but there was no sound reported at all. The government chalked this sighting up to a US Air Force flight operation, but many of the residents who saw this event on that day were absolutely not convinced and truly felt like they were lied to. Some even explained that what they saw was too technologically advanced for the human civilization. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Rendlesham Forest incident. This incident is often referred to as Britain's Roswell incident, and it took place in December of 1980. The incident took place in the Rendlesham Forest, which is a pine forest in England that, at the time, sat in between 2 United States Air Force bases, RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge. Over several nights around this time of year, actually, a number of credible military personnel reported strange and colorful lights both above as well as in the forest. Some of those who were sent to investigate the strange lights reported seeing a triangular craft at close range, and there was even a famous audio tape made of the encounter. After these happenings, the UK Ministry of Defence claimed that the incident posed no threat to national security, and because of that, it was never investigated further. What really happened in the forest all those years ago remains a total mystery, but those who actually witnessed the lights and the aircraft are said to have remained totally baffled. In our number 4 spot today, we have the unexplained UFO. In 2017, after the existence of the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program became more well known, a video was released of an encounter between an FA-18 Super Hornet and some sort of unidentified flying object. There weren't a ton of details released about exactly what happened during this encounter, but using the Raytheon Advanced Targeting Forward-Looking Infrared Pod, tripod, they were able to capture an extremely fast-moving white oval that was around 45 feet long. The oval had no wings, and it didn't appear to have any kind of exhaust either. They were tracking the UFO at an altitude of 25,000 feet just above the Atlantic Ocean, and then they were shocked as the craft rotated on its axis and flew away. There was no explanation released with the footage because it truly is unbelievable and currently unexplainable. In our number 3 spot today, we have the USS Princeton UFO. This UFO sighting comes from 2004. On November 14th of that year, the USS Princeton noticed an unknown aircraft of some sort that was about 100 miles off of the coast of San Diego. For 2 weeks prior to this crew had been tracking a strange flying object that would start out at around 80,000 feet before extremely quickly dropping to hover right above the Pacific Ocean. Black Aces Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate of Strike Fighter Squadron 41 went over in 2 fighter jets in order to kind of scope out the situation, and when they arrived, they saw what at first appeared to be churning water while there was just an oval shape just below the surface. After this, a white oval-shaped object appeared above the water, but it had no markings on it at all. Like, no windows, nothing that would indicate an engine, no wings, and the infrared monitors on the jet didn't pick up any sort of exhaust. The commander and lieutenant commander tried to intercept this strange aircraft, but it very quickly flew away and reappeared on the monitor 60 miles away. Like, when I say quickly, I mean it was moving at 3 times the speed of sound and over twice the speed of fighter jets. So faster than any kind of technology we currently have. We still don't know what exactly this was, but sure, a lot of us are thinking the same thing. In our number 2 spot today, we have the cigar-shaped UFO. Let's set the stage. It's 2:45 a.m. on July 24th, 1948, and there are 20 passengers aboard a twin-engine propeller plane that is at 5,000 feet being flown from Houston to Atlanta by pilot Clarence S. Childs and co-pilot John B. Whitted. Out of the 20 passengers on board, 19 of them are asleep at these early morning hours, and everything seems to be going as per usual, until it wasn't. The 2 pilots and the 1 passenger who were awake all witnessed the same thing about 20 miles southwest of Montgomery, Alabama. About a week after the incident, the pilot explained what he had seen by saying, quote, "It was clear there were no wings present, that it was powered by some jet or other type of power, shooting flames from the rear some 50 feet. There were 2 rows of windows which indicated an upper and a lower deck, and from inside these windows a very bright light was glowing. Underneath the ship there was a blue glow of light. By his estimates, he watched the UFO for about 10 seconds before it completely vanished." The co-pilot gave a similar explanation and also added, quote, "The object was cigar-shaped and seemed to be about 100 feet in length." He continues on, quote, "I asked Captain Childs what we had just witnessed, and he said that he didn't know." While this is obviously very strange and peculiar, what has driven UFO enthusiasts even more is the fact that this strange sighting was of course later investigated by the US government, but the results of that investigation have allegedly been mostly destroyed. Does that mean maybe they found something they aren't willing to share yet? Some people believe that perhaps the pilots and passenger witnessed a secret Soviet spycraft, others believe it was definitely something of the extraterrestrial variety. In our number 1 spot today, we have the New Jersey UFO. This UFO sighting took place in 2001 just above the New Jersey Turnpike. On July 14th, 2001, just after midnight for around 15 minutes, motorists driving down this highway stopped to stare at the sky to witness what no one could believe. There were strange orange and yellow lights in a V formation just above the Arthur Kill waterway. There were a ton of witnesses who were all extremely confused and shocked as to what they were seeing. Air traffic controllers initially denied that there were any flying objects that could have caused the mysterious lights, but a group that is called the New York Strange Phenomena Investigators claimed that they received radar data that night that would corroborate the story that the witnesses were telling. It may not have been aliens, but it certainly was some sort of unidentified flying object that no one had ever seen before, and there were people from all walks of life witnessing it together. Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have Levelland. This incident took place in 1957 in Levelland, Texas, and actually was the inspiration for a scene in the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind. In the real-life incident, dozens of citizens from across the city began individually reporting seeing a rocket or a strange set of lights or some sort of unidentified object, but that wasn't it. Whatever these citizens were seeing was also reportedly interfering interfering with their vehicles as well. Engines were suddenly just dying out and lights were cutting out. If this happened to just one or two, this could have been some kind of a weird coincidence, but it was way too many instances. Something else had to have been at play. The authorities at first thought that the reports were a hoax until they too saw the strange lights as they began to investigate. This is where Project Blue Book came in and they started to investigate, and they came up with quite the conclusion. They claimed that whatever had happened here was simply just a case of an electrical storm and ball lightning that caused the lights and the mechanical malfunctions. That's super reasonable, but the catch with this explanation is that there were no reported storms or thunderstorms or rain in the area that night at all. I'm just saying, something here clearly isn't adding up quite right. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Belgium wave. Near the ending of November of 1989, citizens of Belgium were shocked to report seeing a big triangular UFO hovering in the sky. Aside from these reports from the visual witnesses, however, there wasn't any physical evidence supporting the existence of the UFO. Flash forward to a few months later in March of 1990, however, and new sightings began to pop up, but this time their presence was being confirmed by 2 military ground radar stations. Here's where things get really strange though. 2 F-16 fighter jets were sent out to investigate what the hell was going on, and this is when the pilots found that they couldn't see anything visually, but their radars were able to spot the target. While trying to keep track of these objects, the UFOs were moving way too fast, and the pilots ended up losing track of them. In the end, there were about 13,500 people who witnessed this UFO incident, which has made it one of the most widely experienced UFO sightings of the modern era. The Belgian Air Force has no idea what it was that they had witnessed, but they thankfully did acknowledge that some sort of unknown activity had taken place instead of just trying to sweep it under the rug and pretend like nothing ever happened. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Chicago UFO. This UFO sighting comes from November 7th, 2006, and it was at the O'Hare International Airport in Chicago. Flight 446 was getting ready to head to North Carolina when an employee from United Airlines that was on the tarmac noticed a dark gray metallic aircraft hovering over one of the gates. After this, 11 other employees and even a few people who didn't work there saw this gray saucer floating at around 4:15 p.m. The people who saw it explained that it hovered above the gate for about 5 minutes before it just shot itself upwards and broke through the clouds, leaving a hole in the clouds where you could see the blue sky through. The strangest thing, however, is that this flying saucer did not show up on the radar. The Federal Aviation Administration just called it a weather phenomena and would not investigate it, despite there being around 15 witnesses who all saw the same thing. This story, however, became the most read story on the Chicago Tribune's website and even went international because it certainly is very interesting. I also think at an airport they just want to, investigate strange occurrences, you would hope. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Lubbock incident. On August 25th, 1951, in Lubbock, Texas, a group of scientists from Texas Technical College were all hanging out in the backyard of geology professor Dr. W.I. Robinson. They were all just chilling, enjoying each other's company, until around 9:20 p.m. when they saw something strange. It was a V-shaped formation of 15 to 30 bluish-green lights that were passing overhead. They were completely confused over what it could be, but figured that the lights would likely reappear, which they did. About an hour later, the lights reappeared, and at this point, all of the scientists knew that they had witnessed something exceptionally interesting. But what was it? The scientists weren't the only ones to witness the lights either. About 350 miles away in Albuquerque, New Mexico, an employee of the Atomic Energy Commission's top secret Sandia Corporation, who had a high-level Q security clearance, had been sitting outside with his wife, quote, gazing at the night sky, commenting on how beautiful it was, when both of them were startled at the sight of a huge airplane flying swiftly and silently over their home. On the aft edge of the wings, there were 6 to 8 pairs of soft, glowing bluish lights. There were more sightings as well, all reporting a very similar thing. The group of scientists began investigating, tracking the lights, which they witnessed 12 more times. They measured the angle of the lights, they tracked the speed, and they attempted, unsuccessfully, to try and measure the UFO's altitude. Here's the deal with this though. The government did end up coming to investigate, but the official explanation for these lights is the most cryptic message I've ever seen. It read, quote, I thought that the professor's lights might have been some kind of birds reflecting the light from mercury vapor streetlights, but I was wrong. They weren't birds, they weren't refracted light, but they weren't spaceships. The lights that the professors saw have been positively identified as a very commonplace and easily explainable natural phenomenon. I can't divulge exactly the way the answer was found, because it is an interesting story of how a scientist set up complete instrumentation to track down the lights. Telling the story would lead to his identity, and in exchange for his story, I promised the man complete anonymity. Despite people claiming that this mystery has been solved, by this explanation, people are left with a lot more questions than answers. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Foo Fighters. On a late November evening in 1944, nearing the end of the Second World War, Lieutenant Fred Ringwald was riding as observer in a night fighter that was being piloted by Lieutenant Edge Luter with Lieutenant Donald J. Myers on radar. The men were in the Rhine Valley, which sits north of Strasbourg on the French and German border, when Lieutenant Ringwald saw something. He said, quote, "I wonder what those lights are over there in the hill." When the rest turned to look, they saw 8 to 10 fiery orange glowing lights. They checked with the ground radar, but nothing was registering. The men thought that there was a chance that these lights could be some kind of air weapon, so they turned themselves to be ready to fight, only to have the lights suddenly vanish. The 3 men who experienced the strange lights at first didn't tell anyone about what they saw because they feared being ostracized by those around them. This all changed, however, when stories of similar sightings began to spread through their unit. As it would turn out, many other pilots and flight crews experienced these same orange glowing lights, and one pilot even experienced a strange cigar-shaped flying object. In this instance, the UFO was described as, quote, "a wingless cigar-shaped object, glowing red, just a few yards off the plane's wingtip." Lieutenant Krasny, justifiably spooked, instructed the pilot to attempt evasive maneuvers, but the glowing object stayed right next to the jet for several minutes before it flew off and disappeared. Throughout the years, the explanations for what these people saw have ranged from things like combat fatigue to the works of Nazi astrophysicists, so at this point, what exactly happened here remains quite a mystery. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Big Flap. Back in 1952, while the panic over flying saucers was real, there was a bunch of strange reports of potential UFO sightings over the skies of Washington, D.C. These sightings later became known as the Big Flap, and they were being reported by civilians as well as military radar operators and pilots. In fact, there were so many people reporting these UFOs that a special intelligence unit of the US Air Force was sent in to investigate. What really sparked a lot of concern with these sightings is when radar operators at National watched the objects fly past the White House and the Capitol building. This is when 2 F-94 interceptor jets were sent to investigate, but both times as they approached the mysterious objects showing on their radar screens, they would just suddenly disappear. In the end, as a result of the investigation, what they found, or really the lack of what they found, combined with the official explanation that was released, only worked to fuel some early conspiracy theories that the government was working to hide the evidence that proves the existence of alien life. In our number 4 spot today, we have the disappearance. Frederick Valentich was an Australian pilot who disappeared under some unbelievably suspicious circumstances on a training flight on October 21st, 1978. During the flight, he radioed the Melbourne Air Traffic Control to let them know that he was being accompanied by an aircraft that was about 1,000 feet above him, and at the same time that his engine had begun to run roughly. Air Traffic Control responded to him by explaining that there was no known air traffic at that level, and Frederick explained that he could see a large unknown aircraft with 4 bright landing lights. He explained the aircraft approached him from the east and at first thought it was another pilot playing around with him. For the record, during a flight seems like a terrible time for someone to play a prank. He then went on to explain that the mysterious aircraft was orbiting him and had a green light on it. When Air Traffic Control tried to get further details and asked what kind of aircraft it was, Frederick responded by saying, "It's not an aircraft." After this, his radio transmission was interrupted by a metallic scraping sound, and this is when all contact was lost. Sea and air search began, but to no avail. There have been speculations that don't involve alien abductions, such as a staged disappearance, the possibility of Frederick getting confused and flying upside down, and potentially even him taking his own life. All of these theories have been debunked in some sort of way, and neither the aircraft or Frederick himself have ever been found. The reason why alien abduction has been the main theory in this case is due to the fact that many reported UFO sightings came on the same night in the same region as his disappearance. It of course leaves us with more questions than answers, but it is all very interesting and very mysterious. In our number 3 spot today, we have Apollo 11. We can sit here on Earth all day and talk about the potential for alien life, talk about UFO sightings, but who would know more than people who have actually been to space, which which are of course astronauts. Definitely on the list of coolest and scariest jobs in the entire world, there haven't been a ton of people who have had the unbelievable privilege of experiencing space firsthand, but there are even less of them who have claimed to see something that seems completely unexplainable. People who have claimed these sort of things include Edgar Mitchell, Catherine Coleman, and Dr. Brian O'Leary. The very interesting part about many of these claims is that they also include some sort of government cover-up as well. There was also Buzz Aldrin, who spoke about his Apollo 11 experience, and he detailed the crew seeing something flying alongside them, and at first they believed it was the final stage of a detached rocket, but then Mission Control confirmed that it was actually 6,000 miles away from them, leaving them with no answers on what the flying object could be. I can't imagine going to space at all, let alone encountering a UFO flying right beside you. In our number 2 spot today, we have the FBI documents. In a video that was released by the hacktivist group Anonymous a few years ago, they discussed some sort of FBI documents that are apparently declassified and just sitting on the website waiting for anyone to come across. These documents apparently suggested that we not only have been visited by aliens, but also by beings from other dimensions. This document was sent in 1947, and while it didn't originate from within the FBI, it was sent in by a university department head, and it was treated with the utmost importance by the FBI. The document goes on to say that the aliens that have visited aren't from a planet as we think of it, but rather some sort of etheric planet that interpenetrates with our own, but we just aren't able to perceive it. They're able to consciously make the decision to enter our plane, and in the same respect, exit it whenever they want. The document says that all visits are peaceful, and that they are for the purpose of scoping out our planet, as they might want to call it home one day. This certainly is one of those things that you have to draw your own conclusions from, and while it's good to remain skeptical, it's also imperative that we keep our minds open, because who are we to say for sure? In our number 1 spot today, we have the 2021 UFO. On February 21st of 2021, a blogger was using a radio scanner to try and pick up the feed from an aircraft when he received much more than he ever expected. He intercepted the transmission of the wrong aircraft, but at the right time. As an American Airlines flight was headed from Cincinnati to Phoenix around 1:19 p.m., the pilot came on the radio to ask the question, "Do you have any targets up here? We just had something go right over top of us." After this, he followed up with, "I hate to say this, but it looked like a long cylindrical object that almost looked like a cruise missile type of thing moving really fast right over the top of us." Not only were FAA air traffic controllers not able to see any object in the area on their radar scope, but they still have been unable to identify exactly what it could have been. This does happen more often than any of us really know, and it is possible that the object could have been a part of some covert military or Navy operation, but it certainly raises some alarm bells that it was unable to be tracked in any sort of capacity. I wonder if this is one of those stories that will remain a mystery, or if one day we'll maybe get some sort of answers as to what exactly happened. Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have the Disclosure Project. The Disclosure Project is a non-profit organization founded in 1993 by Dr. Stephen M. Greer, who was a physician and UFOologist, and the goal of the project is to bring forth information about the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence and their interactions with humanity to the public and government officials. The organization has collected over 800 witness testimonies from military, government, and intelligence officials who have had direct involvement with UFO sightings and extraterrestrial encounters. Literally, this entire group is aimed at doing exactly what we're here talking about today. The Disclosure Project believes that governments around the world have been suppressing information about the existence of extraterrestrial life, and that the truth needs to be disclosed to the public. We love a little whistleblowing. They advocate for the declassification of government files related to UFO sightings and for public hearings on the issue. The organization has received criticism and skepticism from some who believe their claims are unfounded. However, the Disclosure Project continues to push for transparency and the release of information to help us better understand our place in the universe. Did you see those James Webb photos? How are we supposed to understand our place in the universe? Alright, when the universe is that big, buddy, still processing it. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Chilean UFO. Okay, so it turns out that there's been a lot of UFOs spotted in Chile, and the government isn't exactly shy about releasing some of the footage. In 2010, the Chilean government released a series of UFO footage that has since become one of the most compelling pieces of evidence in the history of the phenomenon. The incident began in November 2010 when Chile's National Agency for UFO Research received reports of strange objects in the sky over the country's capital, Santiago. The agency then requested the assistance of the Chilean Air Force to investigate the sightings. The Air Force dispatched a team of experienced pilots to investigate the objects, which had been picked up on radar. The pilots were able to track the objects and capture video footage using advanced equipment. The footage showed multiple objects flying in formation at high speeds, performing maneuvers that seemed impossible, really, for any known aircraft. After careful analysis, the Chilean government concluded that the objects were not weather balloons, they were not aircrafts, or any other known objects. While the government did not explicitly state that the objects were extraterrestrial in nature, the incident has been widely regarded as one of the most credible pieces of evidence in support of the existence of UFOs. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Go Faster video. In 2017, after the existence of the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program became more well known, a video was released of an encounter between an FA-18 Super Hornet and some sort of unidentified flying object. This encounter wasn't actually supposed to be released initially, but the New York Times allegedly leaked it, so the government didn't really have much of a choice and decided to release it themselves. This video was the third in a series of 3 videos. We will talk about another one later on in this list. With this particular video, there weren't a ton of details released about exactly what happened during this encounter, but using the Raytheon Advanced Targeting Forward-Looking Infrared Pod, they were able to capture an extremely fast-moving white oval that was around 45 feet long. The oval had no wings and didn't appear to have any kind of exhaust either. They were tracking the UFO at an altitude of 25,000 feet just above the Atlantic Ocean, and they were shocked as the craft rotated on its axis and flew away. There was no explanation released with the footage because it truly is unbelievable and currently unexplainable. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Phoenix Lights. The Phoenix Lights UFO incident occurred on March 13, 1997, when thousands of people in Arizona reported seeing a series of bright lights in the sky in a V-shaped formation. Eyewitnesses described the lights as silent and moving slowly across the sky. The event gained significant media attention and became one of the most well-known UFO sightings in history. Some skeptics dismissed it as flares or a military exercise, but many other witnesses remained convinced that they had witnessed something otherworldly. One of the most interesting witnesses in this case is former Arizona Governor Fife Symington. In 2007, he decided to reveal that he had seen the object himself, and not only this, but he described it as not from this world. Despite the multiple witnesses and this government official's testimony, the incident remains a mystery, and to this day, no official explanation has been given for the strange lights seen in the sky. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Project Blue Book sighting. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Richard French was once tasked with being an investigator for Project Blue Book, which was the name used to describe a study of UFOs conducted by the United States Air Force from March 1952 to December 17, 1969, when the project was terminated. While his job was meant to be to investigate and essentially debunk UFO sightings, later in life he took to Congress to stand up and explain his own UFO encounter that he was never able to explain away. The moment that truly stuck with him all of these years took place back in 1952. He was sent off to Newfoundland after there were reports that a UFO had crashed off of the coast of St. John's. As he arrived to the scene, there were at least 100 people who all stood and stared into the water, and as he was able to follow their gaze and see what they were all looking at, he couldn't believe his eyes. He recalled the water being quite clear, and under it you could see 2 circular crafts, each one approximately 18 feet in diameter. He said that they were both floating just below the surface of the water, no more than 20 feet from the shore, and not only this, but he could also see two beings with the crafts. He said, quote, "The first thing I saw was the UFOs, and it was apparent to me that they were doing something to the craft, and I couldn't really tell what because they were on the bottom side of it and not visible to me except when they would occasionally get over to the side where I could see them." He claimed he watched on as the beings worked on the craft until one of them raised out of the water and disappeared, but not before accelerating to speeds in the neighborhood of 2,500 to 3,000 miles an hour. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Coyne-Mansfield incident. The Coyne-Mansfield helicopter incident occurred on October 18, 1973, when 4 members of the Ohio Army National Guard were flying in a helicopter over Mansfield, Ohio. Suddenly, they encountered a large metallic disc-shaped object that was hovering in the sky. The object began to move towards the helicopter, causing the crew to take evasive maneuvers. Despite their efforts, the object continued to follow them, eventually passing overhead and disappearing into the distance. The crew reported the incident to their superiors, and an investigation was launched by the military and the Federal Aviation Administration. The incident received significant media attention, and it remains one of the most compelling UFO sightings on record. What makes this incident particularly intriguing is the credibility of the witnesses. The crew were experienced pilots with military training, and their account of the incident was corroborated by radar data and other witnesses on the ground. Despite the extensive investigations, no satisfactory explanation has ever been offered for what they saw that day. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Congress report. For this one, we are talking about a recent report that was delivered to Congress from the Director of National Intelligence. Basically, since August of last year, there has been a total of 510 unidentified aerial phenomena observed in protected airspace or near sensitive facilities. According to the report, 26 of these were described as drones, 163 were labeled as balloons or balloon-like entities, and 6 were described as clutter, whatever that means. This is all fine and well, but the concern sets in when we consider that this leaves 171 sightings unaccounted for, some of which, quote, "appear to have demonstrated unusual flight characteristics or performance capabilities." It's also important to note that the majority of these sightings are coming directly from Navy and Air Force pilots. Here's the thing. What we, as the public, know is only a 12-page declassified summary of the actual, real, secret report that was delivered to Congress. Only time will tell if we ever find out what the rest of the report includes or what will happen with further investigation into the 171 sightings, but hopefully if answers do arise one day, we'll find out. In our number 3 spot today, we have the advanced technology. So this UFO sighting comes from a while ago, but it just recently became quite relevant, and that is because some former US Air Force personnel have begun explaining to the Pentagon that they believe back in the 60s there were UFOs that supposedly had the ability to turn off their nuclear warheads. Apparently these officers recently told this to the government's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, who had contacted former Air Force ICBM launch officer Robert Salas to get information about the encounter with an orange flying disc that switched off 10 warheads at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana in 1963. There was another former officer, Dr. Robert Jacobs, who also apparently told the AARO that he had gone as far as to make a film of the UFO for the Air Force in 1964, and that this film captured images of a UFO shooting a test missile out of the sky. With the piquing interest in UFOs and the potential for an advanced civilization apart from our own, it appears as though the government is spending more time now researching and looking into these claims because, well, why would they make them up and then continue on with the same story some 50 years later? In our number 2 spot today, we have the USS Nimitz Tic Tac UFO incident. This UFO sighting comes from 2004. On November 14th of that year, the USS Princeton noticed an unknown aircraft aircraft of some sort that was about 100 miles off of the coast of San Diego. For 2 weeks prior to this crew had been tracking a strange flying object that would start out at around 80,000 feet before extremely quickly dropping to hover right above the Pacific Ocean. Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate went over in 2 fighter jets, and when they arrived they saw what at first appeared to be churning water, while there was an oval shape just below the surface. After this, a white oval-shaped object appeared above the water, but it had no markings on it. Like no windows, nothing that would indicate an engine, no wings, and the infrared monitors on the jets didn't pick up any sort of exhaust. The commander and lieutenant commander tried to intercept this strange aircraft, but it very quickly flew away and reappeared on the monitor 60 miles away. And when I say quickly, I mean that it was moving at 3 times the speed of sound and over twice the speed of the fighter jets. So faster than any kind of technology we currently have. We still don't know exactly what it was, but it certainly was beyond our current capabilities. Finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the Roswell incident. This incident is like the mecca when it comes to a government leak. I mean, this incident is infamous for a reason. The whole thing started in 1947 when some sort of crash took place near a ranch in Roswell, New Mexico. Shortly after this, the Roswell Army Airfield released a statement saying that they had recovered a flying disc from the ranch, but the Army quickly retracted the statement and said that it wasn't that, but instead it was just a conventional weather balloon. So it was a little sketchy, but most people just let it slide until the 1970s. What happened in the 70s is that a retired lieutenant colonel began to speak out. In an interview with a UFO researcher, he said that the weather balloon story was a cover-up and that alien remains were actually recovered from the crash site. There were both first and second-hand witnesses who claimed that not only were there at least one, but possibly more alien spacecrafts that had crashed at the scene, but also that extraterrestrial remains were recovered by the military, who then began to engage in a cover-up. In 1994, the story changed from a weather balloon to a nuclear test surveillance balloon from Project Mogul, and it was stated that the stories of the alien bodies were probably just test dummies that had been dropped from high altitudes. I'm not gonna lie, the whole thing sounds a little sketchy. I obviously wasn't there, so I can't say for certain what happened, but someone is definitely lying about it. That's what I know.
Alright, at number 10, we're going to be kicking off this list with the multiverse theory. If anyone at home is not a fan of science or has never picked up a comic book, then you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. Information on this topic goes deeper than a fat kid in a ball pit, so I'm going to give you the Cole's notes on this. Since 1957, when physicist Hugh Everett first suggested it, scientists have proposed the idea that we could be living in an infinite landscape of universes. There are a ton of theories on how this multiverse is composed, and I am not smart enough to break them all down for you, but I'll give you one example. A common idea is that there's a landscape of universes which are flat and go on forever, with universes sitting beside each other. Because this landscape is infinite, you can have universes that are drastically different. There could be universes where superheroes are real, and people read comic books about ordinary people to try and escape the stress of their super-filled life. And there could be universes that are so similar to ours but slightly off. Like you could have blonde hair instead of brown hair, or Twinkies could be healthy.
With that tragic performance from Che, now coming in at number 9 are the Crossroads. So back in November of 1986, Pedro Oliva Ramirez was making his way from Sevilla to his home in Alcalá de Guadaira. I hope I said that right. As he was turning a corner, he found himself on a 6-lane highway that had never been on the route before. Either way, he hadn't done the journey for a while, so he assumed it could have been new. He continued down the highway, but he started seeing weird things like 20-story housing units, 2 feet high grass bordering the highway, and just unidentified metallic structures. After finally clocking something was off, he suddenly felt hot as hell in the car and started hearing voices in the distance, one of them which was telling him he was in another country in a different hemisphere. An hour into the drive to seemingly nowhere, Pedro finally gets to a sign pointing 3 ways. We have Malaga, Sevilla, and Alcalá. Hope I said that right, I probably didn't. He took the Sevilla detour, and 5 minutes later he was outside of his house in Alcalá de Guadaira, which literally wasn't even possible because he took the route which would have taken him back the way he came, meaning further away from his house. Like, how did man like Pedro drive 3 hours to a sign and then end up back at home within 5 minutes? He even tried retracing his route but never found the crossroad or 6-lane highway again. And a 6-lane highway going missing, that is a big deal, you guys.
At number 8, we have Deja Vu. That feeling feeling when you swear you've seen something before, like you can feel it in your bones. Some people think it could be your instincts telling you what's going to happen, maybe like a spidey sense. Maybe we all have spidey sense, we just don't know how to use it yet. Where other people say it's a delay in the communication between your left and right side of your brain. It's like when you're in a conversation with a group of people and you say something, then someone in the group says the exact same thing that you just said, and you're like, you never listened to me, you're being a bad friend. But what if it's none of these things? What if it's you tapping into the frequency of another universe for just a moment? If parallel universe theory is right, there could be infinite universes. So there could be a universe exactly like this one, but just a little bit ahead. Deja vu could be you getting a glimpse into this space for a moment and then returning back to our reality. This was suggested by physicist Michio Kaku in his book Parallel Worlds. Maybe every time you feel like you've been somewhere before, it's another version of you that has been, and for a brief moment you're connecting to them. If I could tap into this ability, I would make so much money gambling.
Filling our number 7 slot is Lisbia. So back in 1905, a man was caught by police in Paris for attempting to steal a loaf of bread. And I mean, geez, you guys, it's just bread, just let him have it. Cut the man some slack. They ended up taking him to the station and questioning him, and they soon realized he couldn't speak a language. He didn't understand or speak French. He spoke something that sounded like Esperanto but wasn't, and had different grammar to it. After trying to communicate with him for hours, they finally found a way to ask him where he was from, to which he replied Lisbia. And at the time, the police just thought that was his way of saying he was from Lisbon, but then he didn't understand or speak Portuguese, which sus, very sus. But again, it's fine, because he could have been from Lisbon but been brought up somewhere else and never learned the language. Like, it is fine, I will give you the benefit of the doubt. Strange man. But then, when given a map of Portugal, he had no clue what he was looking at whatsoever, so the officers eventually realized the man meant Lisbia was a country. No one knows what happened to the man or where he went, but maybe he just crossed over back to his universe and made his way back to Lisbia. I don't know. Can I get a visa? I'd like one.
For number 6, we have strange artifacts. There have been items that are still puzzling archaeologists as to where they have come from and how old they are. It's like when you wake up after a blackout and you find a half-eaten, uncooked frozen pizza on your floor, and you have 30 text messages sent out to your ex, and you're like, what happened last night? Well, this is kinda like that, but with more science. One of the best examples of this is the London Hammer. It was discovered in 1936, and it seems to be a man-made iron hammer, but it was found in a mound of rock that's over 400 million years old. And I might be wrong about this, but I don't think there was any hammers back 400 million years ago. How did a human tool work its way all the way back to before the dinosaurs? Perhaps it was blasted through a wormhole from another dimension. Hopefully not with the guy who made it still holding on to it. One minute you're blacksmithing a sword, and the next you're getting devoured by an 8-foot tall centipede. There was also the blue rock that was discovered in Sierra Leone. This rock was sent to research labs around the world, but no one was able to identify its origin or link it to any other known rocks.
Coming in at number 5 are the Beatles, and this one is debatable because it really comes down to whether we want to believe this person or not, so let's just go with it. So back in 2009, James Richards was driving home in California with his dog. We love a good doggo appearance. You are a good boy. Don't let anybody tell you different. Now he ends up pulling over because the dog has to pee, and we all know dogs have 3-second attention spans, so off it goes chasing a rabbit. Now James springs into action and starts chasing after her, but trips and hits his head on a rock and ends up unconscious. Like, already this sounds like a very bad remake of Alice in Wonderland without the hallucinogenics, so what is going on here? Now when James finally woke up, he was next to an odd machine and a man called Jonas who claimed he found his body while on a work trip for the interdimensional travel agency that he worked for. Do you have openings, Jonas? Can I apply? What do you need? What do you need for the CV? I'm there for it. Either way, they end up talking for absolutely ages and start discussing the differences in pop culture, because that's apparently the number one thing you want to know about a parallel universe, like not world leaders or climate change. Pop culture. Guess I'm a nerd. Either way, James ended up finding out that in Jonas's universe or dimension, the Beatles also existed. They were all still alive and they were all making music. And I know anyone can say that, but Jonas even gave him a cassette called Everyday Chemistry, which had Beatles songs on it that never existed in our dimension. Those songs are actually on the BeatlesNeverBrokeUp.com if you do want to check them out, but damn Jonas, you have my attention now.
Alright, at number 4 we have the Mary Celeste. This one has been baffling people for centuries. It's one of the greatest missing person stories of all time. It was back in 1872 when the Mary Celeste set sail. It was a cargo ship packed with booze, and it never made it to its destination. It was found off the coast of Portugal with its entire crew missing. Not only that, but the cargo was intact, so they weren't attacked by pirates. The crew still had their belongings on board, so it was not likely that they left by their own will. There's a chance that the whole crew went mad and jumped overboard, or a portal from another dimension opened up and they all got sucked into a different universe. There could have been a bunch of dudes from the 17th century running around in a futuristic world. It would have been like every primetime show from the 90s with a time travel plot. They're from the past, but now they're in the future. What will they do? Find out watching Anchored in Time, 8 p.m. on Fox.
Filling our number 3 slot is the wrong Riverside. This one follows a woman called Carol Chase McElhaney who is driving from San Bernardino to Perris, California. Now on her way there she passed a sign for Riverside, which is where she grew up, so she decided to make the pit stop there to relive her childhood and have some nostalgic vibes, because we all love a cheeky nostalgic vibe, don't we? She started driving to the street she grew up on, but her old house was nowhere to be found, and none of the houses were recognizable to her at all. And it wasn't like everything had been bulldozed over and reconstructed, it just wasn't the same. Straight up, it was different. Freaked out, Carol drove to her grandma's old street to find that that was looking different as well. She then went to the cemetery where both her grandparents were buried to find no cemetery at all, but a fenced up lot with weeds everywhere in its place. At this point, Carol was like, am I being punked? Where is Ashton Kutcher? Like, is he gonna come out? As a final grasp at sanity, she went to University Avenue, a street where there were usually restaurants and hotels, but now there was just a bunch of graffiti and run-down buildings, and the people there were just off. No one was smiling, they were all wearing black, and Carol was getting the feeling that if she spoke to any of them, she'd be stuck in that place forever. But our girl did not give up there. She spent the next few hours trying to find something from her past in Riverside, and when she came up short, she finally went home. Years later, Carol's father died and was going to be buried at the same cemetery in Riverside, and when Carol arrived in town, everything was how it was from when she was young. So how did she happen upon a Riverside from a different dimension that was just bad, and now she's back in the regular one? I don't get it. I don't get it.
And at number 2 we have the cold spot. When you flip your pillow over and it's cold on the other side, that's because there's a small amount of cold radiation buildup on the other side of your pillow from a parallel universe. That thing I just said, that is completely made up. Cold radiation? I'm an idiot. The cold spot is actually an area in our universe that is 1.8 billion light years away. Through what's called microwave background mapping, we've been able to map the cosmic rays in the universe possibly back to the Big Bang. Through this technology, scientists were able to locate this cold spot. The reason this massive field was colder was because it had 20% less mass in it than it should. Why does this area have less mass? Well, because it was just hot girl summer. Don't you remember? Sorry if this cold spot is too skinny for you. Well, actually, some scientists think that this could be from another universe crashing into ours. The force of these universes colliding caused a massive amount of energy to fly out, thus making the area colder. This could be the doorway into another universe where the laws of physics are completely different from what we understand. Now you just need to make the 1.8 billion light year trip to get there.
And finally, at number 1 is the interdimensional tunnel. Now this story actually came from the book Hunt for the Skinwalker, and this particular story is about the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. Now this ranch is infamous for strange happenings. People who have spent the night there have seen things they don't even know how to talk about or explain, so how the hell am I meant to tell you guys about them? I can't. Well, in this book, a hunter that the author met described seeing an interdimensional tunnel open up on the ranch. He saw it through his binoculars, and initially it just looked like a bright yellow circle, but it started getting deeper and deeper, and that wasn't even the worst part. Then a huge faceless creature crawled out of the circle and then disappeared into the woods, and mind you, this massive shining portal was still open for business and ready to pump out more faceless monsters. Like, are we just gonna push that under the rug? I guess so. The hunter left the area ASAP Rocky and never went back there, but he's been utterly convinced ever since that tunnel or portal was to another dimension or universe, and honey, I believe you. You're preaching to the converted.